The gentle hum of the computer fan was the only sound in my home office, a steady, monotonous drone that had become the soundtrack to my life. I was lost in a spreadsheet, the glowing grid of numbers and formulas a digital cage I'd built for myself. The pressure of a deadline hung over me like a storm cloud, and I'd been hunched over the keyboard for so long that a dull, familiar ache had begun to radiate from the base of my spine, a constant reminder of my sedentary existence. My world had shrunk to the size of a monitor, and I was, in that moment, profoundly and utterly alone. Then, I felt it. A soft, insistent pressure against the small of my back. It wasn't a nudge, exactly. It was more deliberate than that. A quiet, steady push, as if a small, warm weight was being leaned against me with purpose. I didn't need to look. A smile, the first genuine one all day, touched my lips. "Hey, buddy," I murmured, my fingers pausing over the keyboard. This was our ritual. My dog, a 70-pound Labrador retriever with a heart of gold and the soul of a goofy philosopher, had a peculiar habit. Whenever I was sitting for too long, especially at my desk, lost in the digital abyss, he would approach me from behind and press his head, or sometimes his entire snout, firmly into my lower back. He never did it when I was walking around, or cooking in the kitchen, or even just lounging on the sofa. It was a behavior reserved specifically for my moments of deepest immersion, of stress, of disconnect. I reached a hand back and found the familiar, velvety fur of his head. He let out a deep, contented sigh, his warm breath ghosting through my shirt. The pressure didn't let up. He held his position, a living, breathing support beam. The tension in my back seemed to loosen its grip just a little, melting under his persistent warmth. Most people would probably think it was a simple request for attention, a dog wanting to be petted or let outside. But I knew better. I knew this was something else entirely. This was a story of loyalty and love that had been written over years, a story that had, quite literally, saved me. It began 5 years ago. My name is David, and my life then was a different landscape altogether. I was reeling from a divorce that had left my world fractured. The house I'd shared with my wife, Sarah, felt cavernous and echoey without her. The silence was the worst part, a heavy, oppressive thing that filled every room. I'd wander from the kitchen to the living room, the click of my own heels on the hardwood floor the only sound, a lonely metronome marking the passage of empty time. My friends, trying to help, suggested all sorts of things. "Get back out there, David," they'd say, or, "take a trip. Go to Thailand," but the thought of navigating the noisy, bright world felt exhausting. I was a ship adrift, my sails limp, with no land in sight. It was my sister, Emily, who finally cut through the well-meaning noise. She showed up one Saturday with a determined look in her eyes and a brochure for the local animal shelter. "You're not going to Thailand," she stated, not unkindly. "You're coming with me. You need a different kind of companion." I resisted, of course. I muttered about responsibility and mess and the commitment. But Emily was a force of nature. She practically dragged me to the Hope Haven Animal Shelter. The moment we stepped inside, the air changed. It was filled with the sounds of barking, whining, and the faint, hopeful scent of antiseptic and kibble. We walked past cages of energetic puppies, tumbling over each other in a fluffy, yapping heap. They were adorable, but they felt like a loud, chaotic demand I wasn't sure I could meet. And then, at the end of a row, I saw him. He was sitting perfectly still in his enclosure, a beautiful, full-grown black lab. He wasn't barking. He wasn't jumping. His intelligent, amber-colored eyes just watched me, tracking my movement with a calm, deep understanding. A laminated sheet on his kennel door told his story. His name was Buddy. His previous owner, an elderly man, had passed away. He'd been at the shelter for a month. I crouched down, bringing myself to his eye level. He didn't rush the gate. He simply stood up, walked slowly over, and gently pressed his head against the metal bars. I slipped my fingers through, scratching behind his ears. He closed his eyes, and a single, deep thump-thump-thump of his tail hit the floor. It was in that quiet, unassuming moment that I felt a connection, a thread of understanding stretching between our two lonely souls. He was grieving, too. He'd lost his person, his whole world. And in that shared space of loss, we found each other. "Okay, Buddy," I whispered, my voice thick with an emotion I hadn't felt in months. "Let's go home." The first few weeks were a period of quiet adjustment. Buddy was well-trained, housebroken, and polite. He followed me from room to room, a silent, comforting shadow. He'd lie at my feet while I watched TV, his head resting on my slippers. He'd sleep on the rug beside my bed, his steady, rhythmic breathing a lullaby that slowly began to chase away the silence. But it was about a month in that I first witnessed the peculiar behavior. I'd landed a big new client at work, and the stress was immense. I was at my desk, staring at a complex project brief, my shoulders so tight they were practically touching my ears. A headache was brewing behind my eyes. I was so deep in my own anxiety that I'd forgotten I wasn't alone. And then I felt it. A gentle, firm pressure right in the center of my aching back. I jumped, startled. I spun my chair around. There was Buddy, sitting patiently behind me, his head tilted. He'd nudged me with his nose. "Hey, boy," I said, my heart rate slowing. "What's up? You need to go out." He didn't move toward the door. He didn't wag his tail in a, "let's play," manner. He just looked at me, then gave a soft huff, and took a step forward, pressing his head into my leg instead. I laughed, a short, surprised sound. Okay, I get it. Break time. I stood up, stretched, and my back gave a satisfying pop. The headache had receded, just a little. I took him for a short walk around the block, and when we returned, I felt clearer, more focused. I didn't think much of it at the time. I figured it was a one-off, a random dog thing. But it happened again, and again. It became a pattern. Whenever I was stressed, or working for hours on end, lost in a fog of concentration and worry, Buddy would materialize behind me. He'd press his head or his snout into the small of my back and just hold it there. It was never a demand. It was an offering, a quiet, physical statement. "I'm here. You are not alone." I started to pay closer attention. I tried to figure out his trigger. Was it the sound of my frustrated sighs? The particular way I'd slump in my chair? The tense set of my shoulders that he, from his vantage point on the floor behind me, could clearly see? I never caught him in the act of deciding. He'd just be there, a sudden, warm presence, a canine intervention. One evening, about a year after I'd adopted him, the true depth of his intuition revealed itself. I'd had a particularly rough day. It was the anniversary of my divorce being finalized, a date I thought I'd been ignoring but which had clearly been festering in my subconscious. A deep, profound sadness had settled over me, heavier and darker than any work-related stress. I wasn't at my desk. I was just sitting on the floor in the living room, leaning against the sofa, staring into space, feeling the weight of my failed marriage, of my loneliness, pressing down on me. I didn't hear Buddy approach. The first I knew of his presence was that now familiar pressure against my back. But this time, it was different. He didn't just press and hold. He wormed his way in, squeezing himself between my back and the sofa. He was too big to fit, really, but he persisted until he was essentially sitting in my lap, his full weight leaning against my chest and back, his head tucked under my chin. And then, he let out the deepest, most heartfelt sigh I have ever heard from a living creature. It was a sigh that seemed to say, "I know. I feel it, too. Just breathe." I wrapped my arms around his solid, warm body and buried my face in his fur. And I cried. I cried for all the lost years, for the broken promises, for the quiet, empty house. I cried until there were no tears left. And through it all, Buddy didn't move. He didn't lick my face or try to cheer me up. He just sat there, bearing witness, sharing the burden, his steady heartbeat a drumbeat of pure, unconditional love. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't just a quirky habit. This was empathy. This was Buddy using the only language he had, the language of physical touch, to heal me. He couldn't offer advice. He couldn't tell me it would be okay. But he could press his warm, living self against my pain and absorb some of it, simply by sharing the space it occupied. From that day on, our bond deepened into something I can only describe as sacred. He was more than a pet. He was my guardian, my therapist, my silent, furry anchor. I started calling his nudges reset buttons. A single nudge from behind was all it took to pull me out of a spiral of anxiety, to remind me to take a breath, to stand up, to look away from the screen and back at the world, a world that now included him. I began to change my life for him, and in doing so, I changed it for myself. Our morning walks in the park became non-negotiable. I started noticing things I'd long forgotten. The way the dew clung to spiderwebs, the sound of different bird songs, the simple joy of throwing a slobber-covered tennis ball for a dog who believed it was the greatest treasure in the universe. I met other dog owners, striking up conversations that started with, "How old is he?" and sometimes blossomed into genuine friendships. Buddy wasn't just pulling me back from my desk, he was pulling me back into life. The nudge from behind became our private language. My new girlfriend, Chloe, who I'd met at the dog park, found it endlessly endearing. She'd be over for dinner, and if I started getting worked up about a story I was telling from work, she'd smile and say, "Uh-oh, David. Buddy's on alert," and sure enough, I'd feel that gentle pressure against my back. He was even expanding his duties, it seemed. The most profound testament to his loyalty, the event that cemented this story as the defining narrative of our relationship, happened on a crisp autumn night. We were at a family barbecue at my parents' house out in the suburbs. It was a loud, boisterous affair, with kids running around, music playing, and the smoky scent of charcoal filling the air. Buddy was in his element, being fussed over by everyone, accepting hot dog fragments with a gentle, polite grace. As dusk began to settle, I was standing near the edge of my parents' property, which backed onto a small, wooded area. I was talking with my dad, laughing about something, when a sudden, sharp, and excruciating pain lanced through my lower back. It was a muscle spasm, unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It stole my breath, my legs buckled, and I crumpled to the ground with a choked cry. My dad rushed to my side, his face a mask of alarm. "David, what is it? What's wrong?" I couldn't speak. The pain was a white-hot fire in my spine, paralyzing me. I was on my hands and knees, gasping, the world swimming in a nauseating haze. People started to gather, their voices a distant, worried murmur. And then, through the fog of agony, I felt him. Buddy pushed his way through the small crowd. He didn't whine or bark. He didn't sniff me curiously. He went straight to work. He positioned himself directly behind me, and with a strength I didn't know he possessed, he pushed his head firmly and steadily into the exact spot where the pain was radiating from, the small of my back. He leaned his entire weight into me, his body a warm, living brace. The pressure was immense, but it was also grounding. It was a counterpoint to the chaotic, searing pain. He held that position, unyielding, his body rigid with focus. "Look at that," I heard my mom whisper, her voice thick with awe. Buddy stayed like that, a canine crutch, for the 10 longest minutes of my life until the paramedics arrived. Even as they were assessing me, he only relented when they physically moved him aside to get me onto the stretcher. As they wheeled me away, his eyes never left me, filled with a concern so human it was heartbreaking. At the hospital, they diagnosed a severe lumbar muscle spasm. The doctor said it was likely brought on by stress and poor posture. He prescribed muscle relaxants and rest. But he also said something I'll never forget. "Your dad told us what your dog did. That pressure, it might have actually helped stabilize the area before it got worse. That's a special animal you have there." Lying in that hospital bed, all I could think about was Buddy. His nudge, our silly, private ritual, had evolved in a moment of crisis into a literal act of support. He hadn't been trained for that. There was no guidebook that said, "To help human with back spasm, apply steady pressure from behind." It was instinct, it was love, it was the physical manifestation of a bond that had been forged in shared sorrow and strengthened through daily acts of quiet devotion. When I was discharged the next day and Chloe drove me home, Buddy was waiting at the door. He didn't jump on me. He walked slowly forward, sniffed my legs carefully, and then, with infinite gentleness, pressed the top of his head against my stomach, his version of a hug. Recovery was a slow process. I had to do physical therapy and was forbidden from sitting at my desk for long periods. Buddy, of course, took this as a personal mission. He became my live-in physical therapist. If I lay on the floor to do my exercises, he would lie beside me, his head on my chest. If I sat in an armchair for too long, he'd come over and rest his chin on my knee, his soulful eyes saying, "Time to move, pal." He never again had to perform his dramatic, crisis nudge, but the gentle reminders from behind my office chair continued, a comforting constant in my life. That was 3 years ago. Today, as I feel his warm head pressed against my back, pulling me from the depths of a spreadsheet, the memory of it all washes over me, the silence of the empty house, the quiet understanding in a shelter kennel, the shared tears on the living room floor, the unwavering support on a cold lawn. I saved him from the shelter, but the truth is, he saved me from a far quieter, more desolate fate. I finally save my work and shut down the computer. The screen goes black, reflecting my own contented face and the loyal, furry face of the dog sitting patiently behind me. I turn and wrap my arms around his neck, burying my face in his fur. "Thank you, Buddy," I whisper. He wags his tail, a happy, thumping rhythm against the leg of my desk. He gives my cheek a quick, sloppy lick, then trots toward the door, looking back at me expectantly. It's time for our walk. I stand up, my back feeling just fine. I follow him, my best friend, the dog who speaks the language of touch, the silent guardian who always has my back, literally and figuratively. He is a testament to the fact that the greatest acts of love are often not grand declarations, but quiet, consistent presences. They are a warm, steady pressure in the small of your back, a gentle nudge that reminds you, when you need it most, that you are seen, you are not alone, and you are deeply, profoundly loved.